A dramatic arrest at a luxury Spanish villa. The civil guards said Robert Dawes was running Europe's largest crime group involved in drug trafficking, money laundering and murder. They moved in 10 years ago after a tip-off from the UK's National Crime Agency, who said Dawes was a feared drugs kingpin who imported heroin from Turkey and cocaine from South America and brokered deals with the Italian mafia and Colombian cartels. But it began here in Sutton-in-Ashfield, where Dawes was a teenage petty criminal. The police said there were beatings and shootings as he took control of the local drugs trade. And that threat of violence was all too clear when Dawes was named as his brother John's supplier in one of Nottinghamshire's biggest drugs trials. Witnesses were protected by armed police. But Robert Dawes, the Mr. Big, wasn't caught until a decade later after bribing Venezuelan border officials to smuggle drugs onto a plane. These suitcases full of cocaine were discovered when that flight landed in Paris. It was worth an estimated £200 million. A French court jailed Dawes for 22 years for trafficking. Now a Dutch court has sentenced him again, this time life for murder. But there are still unsolved crimes that have been linked to Robert Dawes. Nottinghamshire police wanted to question him about this fatal shooting in Sutton-in-Ashfield. Back in Spain, Dawes' luxury properties have already been confiscated and he's been fined several £1 million as justice catches up with one of Europe's most wanted drugs lords.
Something was wrong at Charles de Gaulle Airport. Nobody knew it yet. 32 suitcases, no names, no owners, no explanation. They shouldn't have made it through, but they did. Through one of the most surveilled airports on the planet. Like someone had already taken care of everything. Because someone had. And that someone had been hiding in plain sight for decades. So, who was he? Sutton-in-Ashfield. If you've never heard of it, that's kind of the point. A small town in Nottinghamshire, former mining country. A place that thrived when the pits were open and quietly fell apart when they closed. By the time Robert Dawes was born, it was already struggling. High unemployment, tight streets, not a lot of ways out. And the family he was born into didn't help. His father, jailed. His brother John, jailed. Crime wasn't something the Dawes family stumbled into. It was just the water they swam in. Robert's first conviction came at 11 years old. By 12, burglaries. By his mid-teens, vehicle theft, assault, weapons. Each offense a little bigger than the last. Each one pointing in the same direction. Then, 1994, robbery. He was in his early 20s and he just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "5 years. And here's where most people's stories take a turn. Prison humbles them, resets them. Not Robert Dawes. He didn't find rehabilitation behind those walls. He found something far more useful. Contacts, drug networks, serious people. Men who moved things, product, money, fear, across borders. He listened, he learned, and by the time he walked out, he wasn't a petty criminal anymore. He had a plan. The East Midlands couldn't hold him, not anymore. He moved to Spain, Costa del Sol, Benalmádena, sun, money, distance from anyone who knew his face back home. And from there, he built, quietly at first, then faster, then with a confidence that started to look like arrogance. He went by different names depending on who was asking. The Voice, the Derby Man, Frankie. Names that traveled because he made sure they did. Cells operating in the UK. Networks forming in the Netherlands. Connections threading through the Middle East, South America, Asia. One prosecutor would later say, his operations touched approximately 60 countries. He wasn't trafficking drugs. He was running infrastructure, and he enforced it the way you'd expect. Encrypted BlackBerry phones, corrupt officials on payroll, bribes handed out like business cards. And when bribes weren't enough, violence. One of his own foot soldiers, Christopher Turton, lost track of over £100,000 during a courier run. The money was seized on the M1. Dawes' response was immediate. Turton was shot. In the street. In broad daylight. In Sutton-in-Ashfield. He survived. But he got the message. Everyone got the message. 17 UK convictions, 59 offenses on record, and yet he kept operating, kept expanding. Before I tell you about the murder, and yes, there is a murder, I want to pause and ask you something. Leave your answer in the comments. The NCA had Robert Dawes on their radar for nearly 20 years. 20 years of watching, tracking, building files. At what point does someone like this become too big to ignore? Or is that exactly what he was counting on? Think about it, drop it below, and keep watching. Gerard Meesters was a school teacher, social studies, Groningen, Netherlands, 52 years old, no criminal record, no criminal connections, no reason, not a single one, for what was about to happen to him. He was just a man, living a quiet life, until 4 men showed up at his door. They asked about his sister, his estranged sister, someone he hadn't been close to in years. They wanted to know where she was. Gerard didn't know. He told them that. They handed him a number, a Spanish number. Call it, they said. He did. And then, because he was an honest, because he trusted the right systems, he called the police too. He told them everything, what the men looked like, what they said, the number they gave him. He did everything right. 4 days later, the hitman came back. November 28th, 2002. 8 shots. On his own doorstep. Gerard Meesters died because of his sister. A sister who, allegedly, had stolen from Robert Dawes' network. Hidden drugs, hidden money. Something that belonged to the organization. And Dawes couldn't let that go unanswered, so he ordered a message to be sent. It didn't matter that Gerard knew nothing. It didn't matter that he was innocent. It didn't matter that he was just a teacher. He was close enough. That was enough. The hitman was a British man, Daniel Sowerby, a foot soldier in Dawes' network. He was convicted in the Netherlands in 2005, sentenced to life. But here's what haunted this case for years. Nobody would say who gave the order, not officially, not on record, because saying Robert Dawes' name out loud to the wrong people had consequences. Everyone in that world knew it, so the case sat, cold, for years. Gerard Meesters' family waited, and waited, and waited. Then, a journalist, Carl Fellstrom, an investigative reporter who had spent years inside the edges of Dawes' world. He got to Sowerby, earned his trust, and Sowerby, finally, talked. Named the man who made the call, the man who decided that a school teacher in Groningen was an acceptable casualty. His name was Robert Dawes. While Robert Dawes was living his villa life on the Costa del Sol, someone was watching. They'd been watching for a while. British undercover operatives, deep inside Venezuela, tracking the shipment in real time as it moved from Colombia through cartel hands into Caracas. The Cartel de los Soles, that's who Dawes was working with in Venezuela, not street-level traffickers, military officials, government insiders, people with uniforms and badges who had decided that cocaine was more valuable than their oath. And Dawes had found every single one of them. The logistics were almost elegant. Counterfeit barcodes, a worker's entrance, 32 suitcases loaded in the dead of a Caracas morning, moving through Simon Bolivar Airport like they belonged there, because, to everyone who mattered, they did. But the NCA had already seen enough. They coordinated with French authorities, Spanish Guardia Civil, multiple agencies across multiple countries, all feeding into the same operation. At one point, the NCA bought surveillance equipment and handed it directly to the Spanish investigators. Because catching Dawes mattered that much, the delivery became controlled. The cocaine landed in Paris, and it was seized, every single gram. But Dawes himself, still free, still untouchable. Or so he thought. Because while all of this was unfolding, he made a mistake, not a small one. He sat down with a member of the Gaulle cartel in a hotel in Madrid, and he talked, bragged really, about the shipment, about his reach, about what he could move and where and how. He handed the man an encrypted phone, gave him instructions. He was, in that moment, completely himself, completely unguarded. The Spanish Guardia Civil recorded every word. November 2015. Armed officers surrounded his mansion in Benalmádena. Guns, cash, encrypted phones. Dawes was arrested, extradited to France. And in that Paris courtroom, he tried one last move. The recordings, a performance. He said, a deliberate bluff to convince people he was being surveilled. He wasn't really boasting, he was acting. The judge considered that argument and dismissed it. December 2018. Convicted on 7 of 8 charges, 22 years, a €30 million fine, properties seized, 4 accomplices convicted alongside him, including Nathan Wheat, who received 13 years, 2 decades of patience, and finally, a cell. Here's something I want you to sit with, and tell me in the comments. 22 years for over a ton of cocaine, decades of trafficking, violence, a global empire built on fear. But ordering the murder of an innocent school teacher, what does that get you? Because the legal system is about to give us its answer. And it's not what you might expect. He was already in a French prison when the Dutch came for him, 2021, charged, finally formally, with inciting the murder of Gerard Meesters, a killing that happened in 2002, nearly 20 years earlier. He was extradited, tried in Amsterdam, and in that courtroom, the same man who had outmaneuvered law enforcement across 5 continents, denied everything. Again. Dutch prosecutors didn't waver. They called him the intellectual mastermind, cited his entire criminal history, laid out, patiently, exactly who Robert Dawes was, not just what he did in 2002, who he had always been. The Meesters family was there. After 22 years of waiting, they were finally in the same room as the man prosecutors said gave the order. November 2024, convicted. January 10th, 2025, sentenced. Life imprisonment. The kind of sentence that, in the Dutch system, carries parole eligibility after 25 years. But given his history, given everything on record, given who Robert Dawes is, that parole review is a long way away. His brother John, who ran the UK arm of the operation, had already served his 24-year sentence, released around 2024. Robert won't be following him out anytime soon. As of early 2026, Robert Dawes is held in a Dutch prison. The villa is gone, the network is dismantled. The names, the voice, the Derby man, Frankie, mean nothing now. Just a number on a cell door. Step back for a moment, because this story is bigger than one man. It took 30 years, 5 countries, dozens of agencies, and a journalist, one journalist, sitting across from a convicted hitman and earning enough trust to finally get a name. Think about what that means. The most sophisticated law enforcement agencies in Europe, the NCA, French Octress, the Spanish Guardia Civil, Dutch prosecutors, all of them working together, sharing intelligence, buying each other surveillance equipment. And it still almost wasn't enough. Because Robert Dawes didn't just build a drug network, he built a system designed to survive scrutiny. Corrupt military officials in Venezuela loading bags onto planes. Government insiders looking the other way. The Cartel de los Soles, soldiers with uniforms and state authority, moving cocaine into Europe like it was cargo. This wasn't happening in the shadows. It was happening in the open, hidden not by darkness, but by power. That's the part that should stay with you. Not the villa, not the encrypted phones, not the aliases. The fact that state-level corruption, actual governments, actual militaries, are part of how cocaine arrives in Europe, has been for years. And one man from Nottinghamshire knew exactly how to use that, for decades. But here's what Robert Dawes never accounted for. Patience, not the patience of governments, not the patience of agencies, the patience of a family. In Groningen, who lost someone they loved on a November doorstep in 2002, and refused, year after year after year, to let it become just another cold case. They kept pushing, they kept asking, they kept his name alive in rooms where decisions get made. And eventually, someone listened. That's not a small thing, that is everything. Gerard Meesters was a school teacher, he taught social studies, he called the police when he was threatened, because that's what you're supposed to do. And it cost him his life. He deserved better. His family deserved better. And 22 years later, they got something. Not enough. It's never enough. But something. Robert Dawes grew up believing fear was power, that if people were afraid of you, you were untouchable. In the end, it was a teacher's family that outlasted him. If this story made you think, hit like, subscribe if you haven't. And if you left a comment on those questions earlier, go check what other people said. That conversation is worth having. I'll see you in the next one.